What's up everyone? In this video, we're going to talk about how every culture has its own version of a caste system, how it works, what it actually means for the people inside it, and how it shapes behavior and outcomes. Before I go any further, I want to be clear about something. This video isn't about blaming any one group. It isn't about defending discrimination, and it isn't about saying one culture is better than another. I'm not talking about morality. I'm talking about patterns. You can acknowledge how a system works without endorsing it. And later in this video, I'll break down how to navigate these systems intelligently and set yourself up for success, regardless of the environment you're in. The reason I'm making this video is because of a conversation I had with someone in my personal life. They argued that racism against South Asians is justified because the caste system exists. That statement stuck with me, not because it was shocking, but because it revealed how selectively people think about hierarchy. It pushed me to really examine this idea, and that's what led me to realize something important. Every group in every society has its own version of a caste system, whether they admit it or not. They'll say things like, "Oh, you guys are rigid, you discriminate, you're backwards." And the implication is always the same. Because you have a caste system, you somehow deserve to be treated badly too. There's also a more subtle angle people use. They point to caste as proof that South Asians are naturally submissive, overly conformist, obsessed with hierarchy, like we're programmed to bow to authority and follow rules without thinking. Basically, they use this idea to paint us as rigid, mindless robots, instead of individuals who understand structure and power. So, let's take a step back and define what a caste system actually is. A caste system is a social hierarchy where people are ranked into groups based on inherited traits, things like family background, occupation, or social role. And those rankings influence how much status, power, and opportunity they're given. Historically, caste systems emerged as a way to organize large societies, to stabilize labor roles, and to maintain social order over generations. In South Asia, this hierarchy became formalized thousands of years ago, and it was openly acknowledged and enforced. What matters for this video isn't the ancient structure itself. It's the idea that every society ranks people, deciding who's respected, who's tolerated, and who's disposable. At its core, this video is simple. Human beings will always find reasons to separate themselves from others and to rank themselves higher, no matter the culture, no matter the age group, no matter the environment. The only real difference is that some cultures admit this openly, while others pretend it doesn't exist. With that framework in mind, the real question becomes this: how do you actually navigate these systems and set yourself up to win? The first thing is awareness. The classic advice of just mind your own business and live your life doesn't work if you're trying to move intelligently through different environments. That doesn't mean putting your nose in other people's business. It means paying attention. In any city you live in, any social circle you enter, any environment you move through, notice what's rewarded, notice what's tolerated, and notice what quietly gets punished. For some people, this creates an identity crisis. I used to think that if I just ignored all of this and stayed in my lane, things would naturally work themselves out. And sometimes they do. But over time, I realized something. Not understanding the system doesn't make you immune to it. It just means you're navigating it blindly. And to be clear, I'm not telling you to suppress who you are, or to put yourself in a social straitjacket. Ideally, you'd be in an environment where you can be fully yourself and still be respected, or at least left alone. But that's not always reality. Being yourself can come at a cost, depending on where you are, because different environments reward different things. For example, if you thrive in big city energy, nightlife, visible success, fitness, aesthetics. A place like Miami will probably reward you for that. You'll feel aligned with the environment. On the other hand, if you're anti-materialistic, very frugal, not into the gym, and you dislike anything that feels vain or superficial, Miami probably isn't your scene. But there are other cities, even other countries, where that same set of traits would be welcomed. Ideally, you go where you're welcomed, but not everyone has that option. And if you find yourself in an environment that doesn't reward your natural tendencies, awareness becomes non-negotiable. If you're in a place that values status, aesthetics, and ambition, constantly signaling that those things don't matter isn't going to win you respect. Even if you find a small niche that agrees with you. In other environments, success might be tolerated, but openly celebrating it can be read negatively. I'm not saying you need to dim yourself or lie, but context matters. The same behavior can be read as confidence in one environment and arrogance in another. The key point is this: alignment matters more than intention. And this is where a lot of people from our background underestimate themselves. Because in Western hierarchies, many of us already have advantages: height, conventional looks, strong earning potential. If you understand the rules of the environment you're in, those traits can work for you instead of against you. The hierarchy doesn't disappear, but it can become something you navigate intentionally instead of something you're constantly reacting to. There are two main ways these hierarchies show up. The first is explicit. Differences between people are openly acknowledged, the rules are visible, and expectations are clear. In many parts of the world, hierarchy is openly displayed, which makes it easier to see, even if people criticize it. The second is implicit. Social rankings are publicly denied. If you ask whether these hierarchies exist, people will insist they don't. But despite that denial, the rules are still enforced, through shame, exclusion, or being quietly sidelined. Have you ever noticed something else? Criticism isn't distributed evenly. Some groups are treated as off-limits, while others are fair game. In implicit hierarchies, disrespect rarely looks like open hostility. It shows up as smiles, backhanded compliments, and subtle dismissiveness, just enough that something feels off, but not enough to call out. If this feels hard to pin down, that's because it's designed to be. Every society is answering the same basic questions: who matters, who gets access, and who gets ignored. Hierarchy exists because resources are limited, attention is limited, and groups naturally gatekeep against those they see as outsiders. This isn't about oppression narratives. It's about how humans organize themselves, whether they admit it or not. When I say every culture has a caste system, I'm not just talking about race or family background. I'm talking about how every environment rewards certain behaviors, traits, and appearances, and how those rewards create hierarchy. In some neighborhoods or social environments, being aggressive, loud, or confrontational is respected. In that same environment, being quiet or reserved can make you an easy target. In other spaces, being performative about politics or social causes raises your status. In others, discipline, fitness, and physical presentation earn respect. These aren't moral judgments, they're local rules. What gets you status in one environment might lower your status in another. You see this most clearly in cultures and subcultures with strong, unspoken rules and social penalties. When this happens outside South Asian contexts, it's often framed as individuality. That's just their culture. That's their personal preference. That same generosity is rarely extended to South Asians. When similar patterns appear in our communities, they're framed as proof that we lack individuality, instead of people operating within a shared set of rules. You see this globally too. In places like South Korea, physical appearance, fashion, and grooming carry enormous social weight. Style and cosmetic enhancement are treated as investments in status. Someone who neglects these things can be judged in ways that aren't so different from how caste worked historically. Different cultures use different signals, but the logic is the same. People are ranked based on how well they align with what that society values. The mistake is thinking hierarchy only exists when it's written down. Most of the time, it's enforced quietly, through approval, through access, through social reinforcement. Another thing worth understanding is this. When a group's cultural behaviors don't align with what's rewarded at the top of a hierarchy, that group is more likely to be dismissed. At the same time, there are people from similar backgrounds who are more culturally assimilated. Certain immigrant groups, for example. Their behavior, communication style, and values already fit what's considered acceptable. Because the system works for them, they often don't see the problem. So when you bring up your experiences, they may dismiss them or downplay them, not because they're malicious, but because their position gives them a different view of the system. Sometimes they even look like you. Same background, same ethnicity, but because they fit the environment perfectly, they've never experienced friction. So they'll say things like, "I've never experienced that," or "You're overthinking it," not because you're wrong, but because they're standing in a different position within the hierarchy. This is why it's often more useful to listen to people operating under similar constraints, not to isolate yourself, and not to live in an echo chamber, but because shared context leads to clearer understanding. Personally, I think dating and social behavior are the most honest indicators of where people actually stand. Workplaces and schools enforce fairness through rules and policies. But once you clock out or leave class, people's real preferences show up. Who they choose to associate with, who they date, who they invite in. That's where respect and admiration appear without the pressure of optics. Someone might be polite at work because they have to be, but how they act outside those environments tells you what they actually believe. Many people deny the existence of hierarchy because acknowledging it forces self-reflection, and not everyone wants to do that. The reason understanding this matters is simple. It helps you stop personalizing negative outcomes. When you see the system clearly, you can move with intention. You can decide how much you want to participate in it, how to benefit from it, or when it makes sense to go against the grain in a way that actually serves you. Most people never see these systems clearly, not because they're stupid, but because seeing them forces you to move differently. And once you see it, pretending stops being an option.